Hello, everybody, and welcome to the June SJAA Imaging Special Interest Group meeting. And let's see, today we have Alex Woronow, who's going to talk to us about AI and image processing for Astro-Images. But before we do, I wanted to mention that next month, Paolo Baratoni, I guess, right, is going to be our leader for the monthly meeting. And we don't have a speaker yet. So if somebody has some topic they want to talk about, there's lots of possibilities. Please send either the whole list or me directly or Paolo a proposal, and we'll see what we can do. There's a bunch of topics. AIC just happened. We have the Golden State Star Party coming up, maybe a report of that, or whatever is on your mind. So that would be great. But moving to tonight, Alex Woronow is going to talk to us. Alex is a new club member, and he's a member of a couple other Astro clubs. Let's see, the Las Cruces Astronomical Association and the Tucson Amateur Astronomical Association or something. So great to have you with us in the San Jose Club. Remember to unmute yourself and take it away, Alex.
Okay, well, thank you for allowing me to do this. I should be sharing my screen now. If you don't see it, say something. I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence today in astro-image processing. But before I do so, I'll tell you a couple of other things. One, I'm glad to be a member of your club. I looked around at many clubs to join and wanted one where the imagers looked to be of high quality, and your club won out with the high quality images. So as your reward, you got me. Congratulations. Let's see what else. I'm in Tucson, by the way. So I'm strictly an internet member. So on with the talk. Let's see here. Okay, here's roughly what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to say some words about what artificial intelligence is and some of the basic principles behind it. A lot of people don't like to use algorithms and programs if they don't understand something about how it works. So we'll cover the basic principles behind artificial intelligence and image processing. Then we'll look at the process that has really kicked AI to the forefront of research in many, many fields, and it's something called a GAN, which stands for Generative Adversarial Network. All of these things are neural networks in the broad category. AI is used constantly now in publications. You see it all the time in professional research journals, but most of it is not in image processing, but probably you're aware. Professionals don't spend that much time doing image processing. They put some things out there so the public knows what they're doing, but they really don't overwork them. So AI's growth in image processing has in part been driven by medical imaging, a lot of MRI, X-ray things where they're trying to find a faint tumor on your brain, your liver, or whatever. And it's taking a big part of the work out of medical diagnosis. And in general, statements I read about AI in medical imaging is that it outperforms the doctors who generally read the images. It's also used in surveillance to enhance images, perhaps for identification, but my guess is a big pusher of AI technology is in fact our military with satellite surveillance. I don't see a lot of publications from the military saying that, however. In our domain, image enhancement is one of the major things, and I've listed here some of the things that can be done with AI on astronomical images. One of the most important is denoising. and then sharpening, resampling, meaning enlarging or decreasing the size of your images in a rational and realistic way. Structural emphasis, bringing out shock fronts and loops and all those wonderful things that are out there, stars in galaxies, or not stars, star clusters or clouds in galaxies. And of course, there's brightnesses and color toning can also play a part. Okay, neural networks started way back in the 1950s, and there are probably a few of us who remember that time of life. The idea was, the researchers was to mimic brain's decision making, and computers were fairly new and fairly unpowerful by today's standard. But the work started out with what they called artificial neural networks, ANN. And basically, here's what a simple one looks like. The first ones had 3 layers: an input layer, a hidden layer, and an output layer. These little circles all represent neurons in the brains, and these arrows represent weights. So the value of a pixel perhaps goes into this one, the value of another pixel into this one, and another pixel into this one, and so on, at least for Astro-Images. And the value of the pixel is multiplied by some weight and put into this neuron. This value of this pixel is multiplied by some other weight and added to the neuron, and the value here is also added, multiplied by a different weight and added to the neuron, and the network is fully connected. That's not necessarily true in modern networks, but back in the old days, all the neurons were connected to every other neuron in the next layer, and then the output layer sits over here. So perhaps you start out with an input layer as some sort of image of a dog or a cat, and the neurons try to say whether it's a dog or a cat. They give the probability of it. And if it guesses right, you go on to the next image, show it another image. If it guesses wrong, if it's a cat and it says a dog, then you go back and you modify all the weights in the layers to come closer to making a prediction that was correct, that is a dog. And this continues on and on and on, putting in pictures of pieces of pictures, generating an output, going back, changing the weights. And it's not uncommon in modern cases to use 1 million pictures for input, or at least 1 million fragments of pictures for input, to run for hundreds of thousands of loops through this to get a trained network. Back in those days, computing was a precious commodity, and they didn't train any of the networks to that level, nor were they very big networks. Today, you can train a network on a PC, but it may take you a week of activity, of constant computing to do it. So in the 1980s, they came up with multi-hidden layer networks. The hidden layers here are the yellow neurons or nodes, both are used, and the input layer and the output layer. And nowadays, it's not unusual to have 50 or 100 layers, or maybe more, of hidden layers, and each hidden layer can have hundreds of neurons. The input layer can have hundreds or thousands of neurons, and the output is whatever you want it to be, whatever you're trying to predict, one of those. So these things are very, very large. And some of the layers, for instance, might be recognizing different kinds of noise. Nowadays, within the last year, they've been able to develop techniques that go back and examine what these neurons are doing. And you find that each neuron is developing a specialized activity. One is, for instance, if it's a stellar, if we're taking a deep sky image, one of them might be looking for edges in the image. Another one might be looking for stars and making sure stars are round or whatever. So they all can have purposes, it ends up. And we're beginning just now to go back, be able to go back in a network and see what the heck it's actually doing. And of course, there's some feedback there. If we know what the neurons are doing, then we can use it, better design our networks with the right number of neurons and the right kind of connections. What are the inputs for a simple neural network? In image analysis, it would probably be the individual pixels from the image or from some subpoint in the image. And also for astro-images, if you cut out a little piece of an image and send it to look at and learn from, it's also important to rotate that image into a random position. As I said, the weights capture relationships among the pixels, and maybe, but not really. It would be something like a long arc of dark pixels near a circular arrangement of pixels with a vertical ellipse in them. And you say, gee, that's whiskers with an eye and a slanted pupil. That's what we would infer back. In the meantime, the neural network is saying, I see that, so it's probably a cat, not a dog, for instance. Let's see. And the relationships that neural networks find when they go back and look at what exactly the neurons are finding, a lot of times they're finding things that escape our kind of consciousness when we look at pictures. They're picking out details and relationships that we don't see so easily. And you can think of these neural networks as some sort of bizarre and complex weighted regression line, for instance, multivariate. Okay, so what is a trained network? A trained network is one that's good at making the predictions you want it to make. And as I said, after thousands of cases being fed to it, perhaps millions, the weights in those connecting arrows sort of stabilize, and the network is about as good as it's going to get trained. And the way we evaluate it is not by saying how many of the images we were training it on, does it get right, but by withholding a set of data, a set of images, and then feeding those to it, ones it's never seen before. And when those predictions get as good on those new data, then we consider the network trained. It's actually possible to overtrain a network, keep feeding it the same 1,000 or 100,000 images over and over, and eventually it will memorize those images. And if you present it with something else that isn't in its set, it doesn't do so well because it expects something from this set that's overtrained on. So this validation with new data is very important. Oh, by the way, interrupt anytime with questions. That's fine. So the network is trained when the weights reach a steady state, and simultaneously the predictions are as good as they get. And this can take a long, long time. It's not unusual using a fast PC to train a network for a week or more. Okay, generative adversarial networks. These were invented by a gentleman named Goodfellow at a Canadian university in 2014. He was sitting with his fellow students and having a glass of beer in a bar when their discussions led him to postulate these new kind of networks. Basically, neural network research and activity had come to a stall using the old techniques, the one kind of networks I just showed you. They did about everything they could do. They were out of great ideas. And when Goodfellow came up with this idea, the field blossomed. Just everywhere you look now in medicine, astronomy, physics, whatever, somebody is doing neural networks, and they're using generative adversarial networks, or ones that set of network inspired another generation beyond those. Okay, the G in the GAN is the key word. the G stands for generative. And from our point of view, that means that the network can generate an image. So it learns about images, some aspect of the images, and then it generates an image that has that aspect in it. And the A is adversarial, which means that it's actually the network doesn't consist of a neural network, but two of them, and they compete with each other. And it's this competition that advances them to a state that's remarkably good at doing their work. Here's an example of a GAN. So let me run through it real quickly. This example is in the literature. They talk about it as a counterfeiter network, a counterfeiter who makes $100 bills, say. So this network makes images of $100 bills. There's also real images of $100 bills available, at least to people who have $100 bills. And this one generates a picture at random and passes it to a random selector. This one picks a random $100 bill image and passes it to the selector. And the selector passes one of those two randomly onto the detective network. The detective network looks at it, makes all those measurements, all its little neurons fire, and it makes a prediction. And it either says it's a fake, it's a counterfeit $100 bill, or it says it's a real one. If it says it's a fake $100 bill and it's correct that it's a fake, then the counterfeiter was not doing his job very well. So that feedback goes back to the counterfeiter, who then adjusts, whose weights are then adjusted to make a better $100 bill, or at least a different one. If it's fake and it's wrong, it was not fake, it was the real one, then the detective is updated. Its weights are updated so they can not make that mistake again. If it comes down here and it calls it a real one, and it's correct that it is a real one, that's a success, and you don't have to do anything else. Those are what you want to see, obviously. If it says it's real and it's wrong, then the detective needs to learn how to do a better job so its weights are updated again. So this is what it looks like in terms of flow of information, flow of logic. Okay, here's an image denoiser GAN, and I can't tell you whether this is what people actually use or not. There are many different ways you can put this together, and none of them have published the interior, surprise, surprise, of what it's actually doing. So this is, if I were doing it, I would do it something like this. So there's a denoising neural network and a true, in an area that holds true images with low noise. And the image with low noise, this one here, sends a random image to an algorithm which adds random noise to this beautiful image. It then passes it to the denoiser, and the denoiser removes that noise, or at least it tries to. Now, that image is sent to the random selector along with the image that's perfect. The detective receives that random image and it tries to say whether that is a true low noise image or an artificially generated low noise image. And again, if it says that it's a denoised, it's an artificial image. If it's correct, then the denoiser has to improve its job so it looks just like a real image. If it's wrong, then the detective needs to be updated. It's the same kind of thing as we saw in the last slide. This is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be to pass this as an image pair to the selector, and the detective has to pick out from that pair which one is the real and which one is the artificially denoised image. And then we also update it in some way or fashion according to whether it's right or wrong. But they're pretty simple logic ideas. And the logic is very simple. So I went through the literature actually a couple of months ago and came up with some things in astronomy that were published in professional journals. And matter of fact, it's almost all Astronomical Society of the Pacific from a couple months of their journals. So one thing they're doing besides image processing, which doesn't show up very much, is classification of galaxies using neural networks, recognizing spectral type of stars, and from very faint stars where the spectra are very noisy. The signal noise ratio is very bad. Finding strong gravitational lenses in images. And here was a headline I saw somewhere, and I can't remember where now. Young astronomer uses artificial intelligence to discover 2 exoplanets. And this young astronomer was a high school student. So take note that if you're one of the people who is driven to do science with their astronomy, there are ways to use artificial intelligence to do things that are on the cutting edge and real science. Okay, exploring galaxy evolution, photometric redshift estimations. And there's an entire book written in 2005 on applications in AI and astronomy, a view toward the future. Well, I think we're in that future now, but the book is still kind of relevant. And there was an article called AI Beats Astronomers in Predicting Survivability of Exoplanets. Not quite sure what survivability means. I think it's stability of their orbits. And it even does now recognition of craters on the moon and other places. And you think that was simple. Actually, I spent my career at the University of Arizona Lunar and Planetary Lab, at least a portion of it, analyzing craters on various planets. And when craters land on top of other craters, they beat them up pretty badly. And it's hard to recognize craters, in fact. And I wish I had a neural network back in the 70s, but I didn't. Okay, here are some AI tools. The ones on the left here.
Hey, Alex, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So what I remember from the years I spent in that field was that it was always difficult, collecting the data to train the neural nets, right? Like if you could find 10 billion examples of craters, you'd probably pretty easy to make a neural net that did a good job recognizing craters. But the problem is, how do you know it's a crater? How do you know this? I mean, like you want to give the neural net a picture of a crater and say, this is an example of a crater, and another picture, this is not a crater. So generating the training data was always the trick in those days anyway. So yes. What is the story with that? How would you, do you just have a bunch of people labeling pictures saying crater, no crater, or is there, what's the story there?
There's a couple ways you can go about it. Yes, it is absolutely true. For all artificial intelligence programs that require training, which I guess is all of them, getting the training data is the hardest thing. If you're doing noise, it's pretty easy. You take an image and you add noise. We can all do that. But yeah, on craters, it would be very difficult. I think one of the possibilities is we know a lot more about impact mechanics now than we used to in the good old days. And our computing power is much, much more powerful. I think making synthetic images might be part of the way to do it. I can't actually tell you, but like you said, maybe an alternative is hand the same set of images to 15 people and have them label it, and then train it on maybe 3 categories: definite crater, maybe crater, meaning that some people saw it and others did not. And
yeah, but going further, so one of your headlines was, finding, gravitational lenses from deep sky surveys. Yeah. Again, so there's just, a handful of how many gravitational lenses, you know what I mean? Like the known amounts is in that, what, 1,000?
Yeah.
I don't know. They're not millions that are known, right? And
No.
so I don't, that would be the trick, is training them. I think that's the strength of the GANs, is they sort of generate their own training data, but you're anyway.
Well, it's true, yeah. Again, I think probably I haven't read most of those articles, in fact, but I think that they are generally using artificial data as well as real data to do the training. You can certainly, we know the physics of the lensing systems, so we could make up random 3D distributions of objects around the lensing.
So maybe that's it. Maybe it is just synthesizing lenses and then discovering other ones. Okay, thank you.
I could do some small comment. Actually, GANs are not the only neural networks used for that. Recently, there is a new set of neural networks called auto-completion. Basically, you can give the neural network part of the image, and then you will ask the network to auto-complete the image. Basically, section of the image has to be predicted.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's also another technique that is currently coming.
Yeah, there's, the field is very, very rapidly growing, and there's no way anybody could keep up with all the different applications that are going on now. I downloaded all the requirements to make my own network, and then I sat there trying to make my own data sets, and that is so laborious and drives you crazy. I decided not to do that. Instead to purchase programs. And some of the programs you can purchase are listed in this slide. Any further comments? Okay. Over here, for instance, we have tools now available to us, and they're not most of them are not targeted at Astro-Images. They're targeted at images in general, but they work just as well in Astro-Images as they do in other images. And they have the same flaws, that if you apply them too strongly, you can distort things and run into problems. And that's pretty much true about any kind of image processing program we use, whether it's a sharpening mask or whatever. You have to use it with a little bit of delicacy at times. But sharpening, deblurring, and stabilizing are common tools available in programs. Denoising is available. I'll go into more of that. Clarity is common nowadays too. And clarity is some combination of denoising and sharpening and artifact removal. There's simulated HDR programs out there that are now AI, enhancing structures, masking. And there are ones that, with a little guidance, that will draw a mask for you. They don't do very well in Astro-Images. I'll show an example later where it actually works, kind of. Healing, if you want to remove stars from an image, maybe you're making a training set, and you can use a healing tool and go through each one, each star, and highlight it and have artificial intelligence fill in the area. Star removal in general, we have a few tools that are actually available for that. Lighting, contrast, image resizing, enhancing, and even histogram stretching, which I don't know of any commercial programs that are available for that. There are some that are in GitHub. I haven't tried to use those. Photoshop is often touted as the best artificial intelligence program for image processing. Here's the tools I know of in Photoshop. I rarely use it. I have an aversion to paying money for something that you can get for almost free. But anyway, if you look at this list, almost all of it has to do with, or much of it has to do with, photographers who are professional photographers, and most professional photographers are overwhelmingly wedding photographers and portrait photographers, followed by landscape photographers. So most of these do things like smooth face, skin, transfer makeup from a model to your image and things like that. There's one I think that redoes the hair and replaces the sky and all those kinds of things that we don't need to use. There are, of course, object recognition and classification tools out there too, and they'd be good in scientific research, but they're not relevant to image processing as far as I know. Okay, here's some of the things that I know are available that I use regularly. For image sharpening or clearing, I use TOPAZ Studio. You'll see that one come up constantly. Image denoising, noise reduction. I use TOPAZ DENOISE as my favorite. Noise Exterminator by Russ Croman is good. It's not as good as TOPAZ DENOISE, but for TOPAZ you have to export the image. Removal of STARNET 2 and Star Exterminator. We're now at version 8. These two are competitive with one another. Sometimes one works better than the other, and other times the other works better than the one. So I usually use both of them and see which one gives me the best results. Image enlargement and downsizing, I use TOPAZ Gigapixel. Single image HDR, I use Aurora HDR. I don't really use single image HDR very much, and there are several programs that will do it, and none of them give results that I really like very much. In general image enhancement, we have TOPAZ, Luminar, Affinity, Photo, and a strange one called Photolemur. And Photolemur, you take a photo, you drop it on top of Photolemur, and it takes care of everything all at once. And I usually use it right near the end to see if I missed something. And I very seldom actually publish an image that's been through it, but it makes a real nice check to see if you've come out with the image you really want, because it can do some remarkable things in a few seconds. Okay, AI sharpening and structural enhancement. Some of the advantages of it, unlike, whoops, how do I go back? Let's see here. One of the advantages of it is there's no ringing artifacts associated with AI sharpening, like there are with almost everything else. It controls noise simultaneously while sharpening, so you're not sharpening the noise. And if you want to use something like unsharp mask or decon, applying an AI sharpening tool first actually helps those tools work better, as does applying denoise before applying those sharpening tools. Let's see, but like I said, it can be overdone. If you try to sharpen it too much, you do distort the shapes of stars. That's really a point I'd like to make, is it'd be wonderful if somebody would train a sharpening tool on Astro-Images, and where we could not beat up stars as we sharpen very aggressively. Okay, here is AI Clear, and this is a GIF, so you can see the two versions. Obviously, that's the original version, and here's the cleared version of the image. I'll let that blink a little bit. It does a pretty good job on both the stars and the nebula. Here's Luminar 4 structural enhancement AI. This is part of the Jellyfish Nebula. And I think, again, you can see that it brings out the structures pretty well. This is one I did a long, long time ago. And if I redid it, I think I could do a much better job. There's a lot of noise in this image that I didn't remove. Should have. Image denoising. Again, like I said, this is an easy one to train a data set for. You just take some very good images, not necessarily astro-images, and you add noise to them. And so you have the good image and the noisy image. then you train the network to remove the noise from the noisy version. TOPAZ denoise can do that very, very well. It's under $100. I don't know what it is, probably more like $50, and it's constantly on sale. Noise Exterminator does a pretty good job too. Noise Exterminator says it can operate on linear images. I'm not sure that's very important. And furthermore, I think what it does is, it doesn't document it, but his star removal program also operates on linear images, but it stretches the image, removes the stars, probably the same thing, removes the noise, and then unstretches it, reverses the stretching. And that's fine, but I don't ever use that. So here's a denoising one, again, a GIF, so before and after. This one was denoised with Russ's program. And the image was very noisy to begin with. I never actually finished processing it because it just isn't that good. But the denoising is quite spectacular, at least on my screen. I hope it reaches others. Here's a TOPAZ denoise, and I wanted to show that it works on pattern noise too. So on the left, we have an example with big vertical patterns in it, probably pixel columns that for some reason show up at this resolution. And here it is after it's been hit with TOPAZ denoise AI. And you have all of the structures even sharpened a bit, or maybe they just look sharper because the noise is gone. But I think that's a remarkable piece of technology there. Star removal, STARNET, it comes as a free, it's free if as a standalone or PIX Insight process.
Got a question back about denoise.
Yeah,
So I use TOPAZ denoise and it's amazing.
yeah,
What I find it lets me do is overstretch my image, generating noise, and then feed it to TOPAZ, cleans up the noise, and I pick up details that weren't there before. It's almost like it's making stuff up. How do we know it's not?
well, I'll get to that a little bit here,
Okay.
a bit later. But I mentioned that is an issue not only with TOPAZ or with AI, but it's an issue with anything that manipulates an image. But in any case, I'll talk a little bit about that in a few seconds. So this program, STARNET, is available as a standalone or a PI process, and Star Exterminator is available as a standalone Photoshop or PI process, as I understand it. Here's an example of a STARNET activity. So you start with an image like this, you pass it to STARNET, and it makes two images if you check a box. One is a starless image, and the other is the stars. And all it does is subtract this image from this image and makes this image. Now, if you stretch the crap out of this image, you'd find that it has a background in it. All the stars have large circles around them, and every piece of the image, even if it looks black here, is in fact not down to zero. And that causes problems sometimes when you're processing. It's something to be aware of. But it also means that that information was removed from the starless image. So you not have an image here that is a true starless image. It's one that's starless image minus some nebula as well, even though it's a small amount. Just to be aware of. It makes a difference to you. Here, oops. Okay. Here's an example. STARNET doesn't do everything well. Like here, this part of the star, what do you call that stuff? Anyway, it's over here too. It doesn't do very well in the spikes. This star clearly has a remnant here. This star clearly has a remnant with even a cloud around it, the bright halo around it, and spikes. And of course, if you take this image and start manipulating it hard, you also bring out, especially if you start bringing out faint things, you bring out these stars that are not removed, and you bring out stars that are only partially removed. Other stars back here, there's one that's even less removed, and there are others in here. So the process isn't perfect. I don't know whether more training would help or not, but at this point, that's what we have. Okay, getting stars back into the image once you've removed them is a very difficult process. And people use screening to do it. Screening does not do it. Screening is a blend mode. So you're blending the colors of the stars with the color of the image. And people don't seem to notice that because most effects, the fainter stars, they lose their color much more than bright stars just by the algebra within the screening. There are other ways to do it. I do it using a transfer of a calibrated RGB image and a mask, and transfer through a mask. With a few tricks here and there, but I can talk about that sometime if you need a speaker. But it's a very, very difficult thing. Russ has settled on the idea that he can use something he calls, I guess, unscreening to get the correct color of the stars that are extracted, and then screening to put them back in. And I've had a bunch of communications with him, and I showed him that if you take a color calibrated image, remove the stars, get the stars by unscreening, modify the image, I don't know, just add a bunch of red to it or something, anything, and then put the stars back in, and then pull up image calibration again. You find your image is no longer calibrated, the star colors have shifted. So it doesn't work. But whether it works good enough for you is something you'll have to decide for yourself. Image HDR, Aurora does that job. About $100 for Aurora. Here's HDR on an image. This is, I guess, the original image, and there's what HDR does to the image. So if you pass that first image into the HDR program, that's what you get. And you get basically the same thing if you throw it at that photolemur program. HDR on a completed image can actually tone down things. This is the Tarantula Nebula. If you look at the area like in here, where the arrows are, it's almost saturated. It's not quite saturated. And so the HDR pulls it back and gives you details in some of these otherwise bright and saturated areas. So it's worth doing. Okay, up and down sampling is, when I post things on AstroBin and I down sample. If I'm going to print an image, I upsample. And my favorite tool for doing that is gigapixel. So up here is upsampling by PixInsight and by gigapixel. And if you look at this area here, it's this wavy area. Here's what it looks like with PixInsight, and with gigapixel, there's an organization to it. Is it real? I don't know. It's hard to say. That's the sense it makes out of it. Here's a linear structure. If you upscale it with PixInsight, it comes out as a dashed line. If you upscale it with gigapixel, it comes out as a continuous line. Again, yeah, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But the same thing is true about any upscaling method. It's interpolated. If you have a red pixel sitting next to a green pixel, the one in between is not necessarily yellow, even though that's what you might interpolate it to be. It could be blue. You don't know. So anytime you screw with the resolution of an image and upscaling, you certainly are introducing artifacts into your image. It matters to you, that's yet another thing. I generally do my images for one purpose, and that's art. So for me, I don't really believe that any scientist is going to go to AstroBin, pull off my images and start analyzing them in order to make inferences about the origin of the universe. Mine are for art and for my fun. Okay, AI can help make a mask. Here's the image at the top of the screen here. You pass it to this TOPAZ mask making program. You say these areas are definitely things I want to keep inside, to preserve. I don't want the mask to cover them. Out here, I want to cover this for sure. And in this blue area, I don't know what I want. I can't find the edge of it. And so here's the mask it made from that. Is it a good mask? I don't think so, but it looks to me, you know, it picked up all of this stuff, but the mask goes out too far. Over here, it nicely said, these are not part of the nebula. Let's get rid of those stars. But here's a star, and it put that one in, put these in. So I don't ever use AI masking. I haven't found a good use for it yet. Maybe somebody else has. Okay, image stretch is not yet commercially available, but here's one. You can go out and download this program from GitHub. If you download all the associated Python subs and everything else and build the project, this one took this JPEG image. Here's what it looked like when he ran it through normal stretching kind of pipelines. And here's what it looked like using AI. That's pretty darn good. And I'd love to have something that took my images from here to here without all the rigmarole we go through to stretch things and not overstretch them and so on. But as of now, there's nothing out there that we can buy. This is an old picture from a Pixel 4 camera with night sight. And that one actually can take pictures up to 16 images at 15 seconds each. So you have to set it on a tripod or I guess a rock or something. It takes those pictures, stacks them internally, stretches them using AI, and outputs a picture like this to the screen. I think that's pretty remarkable. Okay, as I said here, only STARNET, Star Exterminator, Noise Exterminator, and the Noise Exterminator were trained on Astro-Images. So there's lots of opportunities out there for anybody who wants to get into this field to try to train the kinds of networks that already exist for image processing, but make them specialize in astrophotography. Maybe there's even money to be made at that. Here I said, Astro-Images have to specify, you know, even without Astro-Image specific training, the outputs of the images I produce never have a flamingo in them anywhere. I have an acquaintance in one of the other clubs who, every time I show an image with AI in it, he tells me that makes the image scientifically useless, and you never know when it's going to just put a flamingo or a pigeon into your image. And now I've done hundreds of images and I have yet to see a flamingo or a pigeon. It can't do that because it's taught to recognize a sharp image. It's not taught just to change your image into some other image that's seen. But the point is there are, in fact, artifacts. Hey, here's something that, as I said, I'm interested in the art side. So I took this image, and there's a thing called AI style transfer. I took this image, and I said, render this image in the style of these clock gears. And here's what it got. And I really enjoyed doing that one. That was a kick. Okay, here's Photo Lemur. And this is, you know, drop your image on top of it and see what photolemur does to it. So there's a before and an after. And it is kind of like a HDR, high dynamic range enhancement. Okay. Conclusions, use of artificial intelligence are abundant. In astronomy, AI is taking hold for image data interpretation, which if you could write your own programs, you could perhaps use Hubble telescope data to make scientific discoveries. And it's useful for image enhancement. And for someone who wants to make a neural net for astronomy targets and train it, count me in. I'll be glad to help in any way I can. Okay. This is some AI music. Now, I'm going to get rid of that, and because I did not address artifacts as I thought I would. I missed that part apparently in the slide. But as I said, there's a danger of artifacts in everything we do. If you sharpen an image, you can bring in halos around your stars, even ever so slightly. When you sharpen an image, a nebula, you'll see structures in it that may or may not be there. All the decon, for instance, is an approximation. It's an iterative process that is in no way guided to required to match reality. The spreading function is assumed to be the same throughout the entire image, and it's assumed that you know what that spreading function is. Well, AI is the same way. It can generate artifacts. They call them, what do they call them in this world? Hallucinations, they call them in the AI world. No, there never seem to be any penguins or flamingos or anything, but they're hallucinations. And I think any image we process has lost any credibility as soon as we stretch it, because the stretching is nonlinear, and as such, it's not undoable. And so anybody who wanted to measure anything of value in the image, well, not anything of value, but many things of value, doesn't have access to the raw data. So it's just the way it is. And as I said, since my interest is primarily the artistic side of it, I'm not too worried about it. But if it worries you, I certainly would say don't do it. That's all what I got. So I'm going to stop sharing. No, I won't stop until if there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alex. It was really good. And I'm sure we have some questions. So help me out here. Anybody got any questions for Alex?
Well,
I'll stop the sharing. But
yeah, I can start. Oh, Francesco, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm going to ask the same question that I asked Russ during the AIC. Well, in this case, was more of a pun, but I was asking what's next on the extermination block. So some things that I'm thinking of, correction of flexure or images that are degraded by poor tracking. What do you think is the evolution for astronomy oriented tools?
Yeah, a lot of, right now, for instance, there are in TOPAZ denoise. You can denoise images that have motion blur in them. I'm not sure how good that is, but it has that option, motion blur. And it has like 3 or 4 different blurring modes. And each of those has within it 3 or 4 subsets, which are things like extreme, moderate, little, and it will automatically select one for you. But I usually go through several different ones, look at it. You'd be surprised how many times I'm processing an image from a large telescope. It's one of these ones from iTelescope or somewhere. And I run it through the motion blur denoise, and it does a remarkable job on it, suggesting that down at the pixel level or so, there's motion blur tracking errors. So some of that is already available. What I would like to see is, let's see, what would I like to see most? I think I'd like to see the stretching one most, teaching AI to take an image, one of our stacked, stretched color images, and stretch it to an HDR image right off the bat without saturating any of the stars or any of the nebula or galaxy components in it. That would be real nice. And as I said, there's a network out there that comes pretty darn close to doing that. It just has to be implemented and distributed.
I'll tell you one, Francesco. Here, we could do this as a group project here. We have enough talent in computer science and AI. A grader. So in other words, scrape all the AstroBin images and, find out which ones were, nominated and which ones were selected and so on. And train a net to grade your images. And then as you're processing, you could see if you're improving things or making them worse. What do you think?
I think, why stop there? Why don't create a tool that applies the transformation that statistically give you a higher score?
Right. Well,
that assumes that your artistic desires or goals are the same as, or that you want your images to match.
right.
I mean, this is why I don't join. I joined one competition on Telescope Live, and I saw my image and I saw the ones that won, and I didn't agree with,
I agree with you. But anyway, I am saying this half seriously because I think it would be interesting to get a computer to give you feedback on your images. Now you can, like all computer advice, you can take it or leave it.
I think another good one would be to grade your subs and weight the subs, throw out a bunch of them if necessary, have some really good quality subs to train it on. It would be pretty easy. And then say, look at these and tell me what you think. I'm not sure that you could do one that would be universal. Maybe.
I think the next level probably will be to put the AI on the telescope itself, on the computer that controls the telescope. And basically, it can actually reject images that are bad and select images that are good on the stack even before you actually go to processing, because that saves you time, right? One of the big drawbacks for astro-imaging is that it's time consuming. You have to take flat, you have to take dark, you have to take the calibrations, all this stuff. And AI is famous with the fact that it can fit in small computers and it can reduce the data. I mean, it can do dimensionality reduction, basically to cut the time to get the result. But that's probably for the future time, how to put AI on Raspberry Pi that high uses and make the image session on the field much better. Right? That's IoT, Internet of Things, right? Yeah.
Somebody, by the way, somebody has some background noise. Just anyway, yeah, I guess it must have been you, Nick. Feel free to speak up, but yes, go ahead. Any other questions?
No, but I'll make one more comment about
Please.
Competitions on AstroBin. I at one point volunteered to be a judge and got into level 2. And there's a secret page where judges can communicate with each other. After 2 weeks of listening to the judges babble about this and babble about that, I withdrew as a judge and told whoever owns Astro-Bin that I did not want any of my images subjected to the competition. So I removed myself from it because the judging was, you know, it was, most of the judges had things that I just thought were irrelevant as relevant. You know, like how many likes you got and things like that.
All right. Well, I guess if we have no more questions, thank you very much, Alex. And as is our tradition, please unmute yourself and give Alex a big hand. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll see everybody, or I won't, but Paolo, we'll see everybody next month. And until then, take
Hey,
care.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Uh,